In this video, I will show you how to install Fortigate virtual machine in VMware Workstation. Now, I've been using VMware Workstation for so many years, and it's honestly one of my favorite hypervisors for Windows just because of how stable it runs. Now, assuming you watched the previous videos on how to download the Fortigate VMware ESXi image from the Fortinet support website, this version should also work in VMware Workstation. Now, once you download the compress file and you extract it, you should get a few files to run the virtual machine. The main files that we are interested in here are the disk files, like the Forti operating system or the Forti OS, and also the data drive, which represent a log disk where system logs and traffic logs are getting stored. Now, also there are a few OVF files that represent templates to run different virtual machine settings in different platforms. The one we are interested in is just the plain Fortigate-VM64.ovf. And once you double click this file, it should take you to the Fortigate VMWare, where you should read the terms of service and agree to it. And then you can choose a different name for the virtual machine if you would like to. I'm just going to leave it to Fortigate-VM64, and I'm just going to click import. And as simple as that, it should import a Fortigate instance in your VMware Workstation. Now, before we do anything, let's edit this virtual machine and let's see what kind of specs it got. Now, we're starting with 1 processor and 2 gigs of RAM, and we have here the 2 disk files for the operating system and the log disk. And also we have 10 different interfaces or 10 different ports on the firewall. So this will be port 1 up until port 10, but we obviously don't need that many for our example. I'm just gonna keep only the first 3 to represent maybe the internet interface, and then 2 different private networks. So we'll have port 1, port 2, and port 3 on the firewall, and I'm just going to remove all the extra NICs. For the 3 network interfaces that I have left, let's take a look at the network interface type. As in VMware Workstation, there are 3 different network interface types to choose from based on your use case: the bridge, the NAT, and the host only. Now first, in my Windows 11 host machine where I run VMware Workstation, I'm connected via Ethernet, and let's take a look at my IP address in the network and internet settings. As you see in here, my IP address that I was given 172.20.0.20. This is a /24 network, and I acquired it via DHCP server on my router that gave me this IP address. So if I were to connect a virtual machine as bridge, which is the first network interface type, this would connect me to the same network but with a unique and different IP address. So for example, I might get 172.20.0.21 or .22 or any other IP in the same subnet but different IP address from my Windows 11 machine. The second interface type is called NAT, which basically joins the virtual machine or the interface that is connected as NAT to a virtual private network inside the computer and assign this an IP address from this network, and then once the traffic is leaving your computer, it's gonna be merged into your own IP address. So the traffic from your router perspective would appear as it's coming from 172.20.0.20, and this is for the NAT network. Now the third type is host only. This is something you would use for restricted virtual machine that you do not wanna access the internet or outside network. So basically also have the same concept of the NAT network. It assigns a private network in your Windows machine and also allows it to communicate back and forth with the Windows machine but not outside your Windows machine. So a host only virtual machine would not be able to access the internet. So now let's click OK temporarily and let's take a look at the network editor in the VMware Workstation. So under edit, there is an option called virtual network editor, and this would show you the 2 networks that I just talked about, the NAT and the host only. And these are also have nicknames like VMNet 8 and VMNet 1. And you'll see in here by hovering over your network settings that these virtual network adapters are actually connected to your computer right now. But they are also given a virtual network subnet that are randomized on every VMware installation. So in your computer, you will have different IP addresses than mine, and that's because every time you install VMware Workstation, it just regenerates these IP addresses. So assuming you have an interface and you connect it to the bridge network and you are unable to get an IP address for whatever reason, maybe your router has a limitation on IP addresses or you don't have a DHCP server running, you can try to change the network interface to NAT. In this case, it will help you to overcome this problem. Then you should be able to address the interface by this IP address inside your Windows machine only. Once it leaves your Windows machine, it will be added to the 172.20.0.20, which is my Windows IP address. And for the host only, it should not be able to leave the network outside your Windows anyway. And these network interfaces also have DHCP server running. So if you join a VMware network interface to one of these networks, it should get an IP address automatically using the DHCP server run by VMware. So ideally, you would choose your first interface to be your internet network and connect it as bridge, because this would give you the most ideal performance. Otherwise, you would choose NAT if bridge doesn't work in your case. Now for the private network, I created two different interfaces for two different private networks, and those ones should not be bridge, NAT, or host only. In fact, we will take advantage of a feature called the LAN segment. What the LAN segment is, it allows you to create a virtual network other than the VMNet 1 and VMNet 8, and it allows it to be run isolated inside VMware, but there is no DHCP server running, there is no automatic setup of any sort, you just do everything on your own. And this is the best way we can isolate virtual machine and have them go through the firewall in VMware Workstation by having the firewall connect to the bridge network and also connect to different LAN segment, and having other virtual machine like Linux machine or other operating system connect to the LAN segment. In this case, you would have the firewall communicate and control traffic for these VMs. So let's start by creating a LAN segment. In this case, I'm going to create a first LAN segment. I'm just going to call it a design team, and that's all you need to configure in here. And then I'm going to create another LAN segment. This one, I'm going to call it the IT team. So now I created two different LAN segments to use as private networks inside VMware Workstation. And then I'm going to connect each network interface to one of these LAN segments. So my board 2 or my network adapter 2 will connect to the design team LAN segment, and the third interface or the network adapter 3 will connect to the LAN segment IT team. And this way I have one interface to represent the internet running on bridge, because it gives us the most ideal performance and internet speed. And also network adapter 2 will connect to design team, network adapter 3 will connect to IT team LAN segment. Now, everything in the firewall VM settings is correct. We should be able to fire up this virtual machine and test it out. Now, for the first time you run the firewall, it should go through formatting the disk process to make sure it meets the criteria for the operating system. Once this is done, the firewall will reboot, and then you should be able to log in to the firewall for the first time. Once you see the word login appear, that means the system has fired up and it's ready for use. So the default login is admin with no password. So I'm just gonna put admin and enter for the password. It's gonna force me to put a new password so it wouldn't be empty. And once this is done, I should be able to see the Fortigate-VM64, and now I'm inside the CLI or the command line for the firewall. Now the first CLI command that we need to access anything is to get the IP address from the first interface or the bridge network interface that we connected to the firewall. So by this, we will learn the first command to use in the Fortigate command line. This command is very important. It's called get system interface physical. So by doing get system interface physical, it should give us the IP addresses for all the physical ports on the firewall, which in this case we have 3 ports. We have port 1, which is set to DHCP, so it was able to get an IP address from the same network as my Windows 11 computer. It's also a /24, and this is what we would need to use to access the GUI. Also notably, port 2 and port 3 are static IPs, and they are also connected to LAN segment, so there is no way for them to acquire IP anyway, even if they are set to DHCP. So when dealing with LAN segment, we do everything manually. Now before we start going and accessing these IP addresses via the GUI, we need to make sure the access is allowed. So for now, we will learn the second command to start configuring network interfaces on the FortiGate. This command is very important. It's called config system interface. So by going into config system interface, we should be able to configure either port 1, port 2, port 3, or even virtual interfaces like loopback interfaces or VLAN interfaces or aggregate interfaces. We can learn how the structure of the config is by doing the command show. And this command you can do on any menu on the system. You can just do show and would allow you to see what's inside this config. So under config system interface, if I do a show, it should show me this structure like edit port 1, set VDOM, this is just the VDOM or the name of the firewall. Everything by default would say root, so this part you should ignore until we get to the VDOM part. Now the second option is the mode. You can either be DHCP or static. So for our first port is DHCP by default, and that's why I choose this to be the bridge interface. And as you see, there is allow access statement which shows which access you are giving to this specific interface. So for port 1, we are allowing ping access, HTTPS, SSH, and FortiManager. Now, as I mentioned in the first videos, HTTPS access does not work in the trial VM. So as a temporary solution, we have to enable unencrypted HTTP login on this interface so we can access it via the GUI. So as you see right now, we are able to ping, we are able to SSH, but we are not able to access the GUI without adding this part. So by going into the port 1 config, by just saying edit port 1, I can say set allow access, and I can also click the tab button to complete the statement so I don't have to write the whole thing. So by now I'm gonna click tab and it's gonna complete allow access because this is the only word that starts with ALL. And then I'm gonna choose an option. Also, if you don't know what you can type in a specific command, you can also put the question mark. So once I put the question mark, it will show me all the possible actions that I can put in this specific statement. So for allow access, I can put things like ping, HTTPS, SSH, SNMP, HTTP, Telnet, FortiManager. For here, we just need to add HTTP. We also need to keep the older ones. So I'm gonna put HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, and ping. We don't really use FortiManager, so we don't need to add it in this case. I'm just gonna keep the main ports HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, and ping. We can double check by doing the show command again inside port 1, which would show us only the config related to port 1. So I'm gonna do a show command. As you see in here, the mode is DHCP. The allow access now have HTTP port, and we can save the command finally by doing either next or end. And this is important because right now we added the access, but the setting is not yet saved. So usually if you write next, it should take you back to the network interfaces where you can edit port 1, port 2, or port 3 again. Or you can also close by using the command end, which should take you outside the interface menu completely. So it depends if you are trying to configure multiple interfaces, you should use next, otherwise you should use end. In both cases, the settings are now saved. So now we have the time to test accessing the interface using the IP address 172.20.0.22. Again, if you are not sure what IP addresses you got, make sure you use the command get system interface physical, which I write in this case in short words, which also works. So as you see in here, I'm on 172.20.0.22. So now I'm gonna fire up my browser and I'm gonna get into 172.20.0.22. And as you see, I got to the GUI of the firewall, which I'm gonna log in using the same login credential I created earlier. In this case, I'm gonna call this Fortigate-VM64. I'm gonna keep it as is. And now it's asking me how do I wanna see my dashboard or the GUI. In this case, I recommend using the comprehensive setup, which shows you most of the monitoring and logging screen that you need to see or get a better visibility of the firewall. So comprehensive would show you more options in the GUI and you can add and remove more as you go. And this is the recommended way. And then I'm gonna click OK. In this case, I'm gonna see a message about the FortiOS and click OK. And now this is the main GUI for the FortiGate firewall. As you see in here, because I choose comprehensive, it showed me all this different ways of monitoring the firewall, like monitoring the different policies or monitoring the different sources or routing and DHCP. All these things are easily accessible in here instead of adding them manually by choosing the default setup. So this is the way I like it. Now let's go into network interfaces. As you see in here, we have three different ports: port 1, port 2, port 3, and this is how our interfaces are configured. First port is configured via DHCP, so get an IP address from the same network as my Windows computer. And as you see in here, it's giving you a red warning on the HTTP protocol because this is unencrypted. You can also see the browser is saying not secure. And this is something you should only do on the lab environment. You should never enable HTTP access on a regular firewall in work environment or in your home network. Now the second and the third interfaces are the LAN segment. As you see in here, they do not have an IP addresses, and that's because we have to configure them manually. So let's take a look at how we can configure an interface in the same way we did from the CLI, but from the GUI. So by going into port 2, you see in here, this is a physical interface, and it's asking us, how do you want to set up this interface? In a world where you are connected to a DHCP server like a router or even the VMware host only or NAT networks, you should be checking the DHCP so you get an IP address automatically. But as we know, there is no DHCP server running here. This is a LAN segment, completely isolated network. So we have to configure this manually. We have to design our own network. So port 2, which I dedicated for the design team, I want to give them the IP address 10.10.10.0/24, and I'm going to give the first IP address of the network to the FortiGate itself. So it's going to be 10.10.10.1/24. This will be my design network, so I'm just going to give it also an alias here, design team. Now, similar to the allow access statement that we enabled HTTP from in the CLI, you see the same in here, except it actually does not show you the HTTP option from here because it tries to discourage you from using such unencrypted protocol. It also doesn't show you the telnet, which is a way to connect to a shell without encryption. So in this case, you can enable SSH at least and ping, but in order for you to enable HTTP on an interface, you have to do it from the CLI. So now we have this all set up. We also need to set up a DHCP server. So when we have a virtual machine in VMware Workstation, we have ability to get an IP address from the FortiGate itself. And from the GUI, it's very easy because it automatically populates everything for you. Like the address range that is possibly given to the host is automatically created 10.10.10.2 right after the network interface IP itself. And then 254 is the last IP address. And this is a /24. The default gateway where the traffic is going to leave the network is the same as interface IP. So 10.10.10.1 will be the default gateway. And the DNS server is the same as the system DNS. So we don't need to change anything for DNS right now. There are also a few advanced settings that might be interesting for you, like having a static DHCP assignment, like giving a specific IP address based on a MAC address, or giving exclusions and so on. So in this case, we don't need any advanced setting for right now. We just need the default setup. The firewall already helped us by giving us the IP range automatically, the net mask, and the default gateway. So this way, it should be all set to go. I'm going to click OK. So now our port 2 is correctly configured from the GUI. We should use the CLI just for a few more things, like enabling HTTP access on this interface. And then let's try to do port 3 also from the CLI to see how we can do it from scratch from the CLI. And then to enable the DHCP server as well on port 3, we'll do that from the CLI as well. Now, because the VMware Workstation style is very poorly formatted, I'm gonna SSH to the firewall to do the same thing instead of doing the setup from here. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch Windows Terminal, or you can use whatever SSH client you can use, like Buddy or Secure CRT. In this case, Windows Terminal works fine. So I'm gonna do SSH, which connects to the firewall using shell or port 22. And I'm gonna do admin, which is the username. Then the IP address was 172.20.0.22. Once I give this access, I should be able to click yes to the certificate error, and then I have to give my admin password. So now I'm inside the firewall the same way I was inside VMware Workstation, but at least in here is more easier to read. So I'm just gonna go down a little bit, and now I'm gonna go again to the config system interface page. And as you see, if the word is unique enough, you can write it in short format. So I always put config sys. I don't have to put system altogether. And this is just a personal preference. You can do the whole word if you like. You can also write a few letters and tab. And this way the system will automatically complete the word for you. So now if we do the show command again to see how the network interfaces are laid out right now, we can see in here port 1 is still on DHCP, allow access ping, HTTPS, SSH, and HTTP. Port 2 has only ping, SSH, and it also have an alias design team. There is also a few IPv6 default settings that are enabled in here, but we don't have to worry about that for right now. We just need to move into port 3, and port 2 we need to allow HTTP. So I'm gonna do edit port 2, and then I'm gonna write the command set allow access. And instead of writing the whole thing, I can just copy it from up there using the right click and paste it in here. This way, if I do a show, I have enabled HTTP access on this interface, port 2 for design team. So every interface IP should have its own allow access, and you can enable and disable management via HTTP, HTTPS individually for every interface, unlike some other network devices from other brands. You can also have granular restriction on these admin access rights, which we will see in a later video about hardening the security of the FortiGate. But for now, we have it open for anybody pretty much on the HTTP protocol because we are forced to do it on the trial VM. Now I'm gonna do next because I need to configure another interface. This time is gonna be port 3. And the good thing is we have the other port in here so we can use as a reference. But if we can do a show right now, we will see it has no configuration at all. It's just the basic setup like the SNMP index, which is like the order in the list, the type, which is physical. Otherwise it will be like a VLAN or aggregate. And the VDOM is just if you have virtualization enabled. So for this case, I'm gonna start by giving it an IP address. In the design network, I give it 10.10.10.1/24. In this network for IT team, I'm gonna give it the IP address set IP 10.10.20.1/24. And here you can use the subnet mask or the CIDR mask, which makes it easier to configure. So I give it a different network for the IT team. And I also want to give it the same allow access statement. So I'm going to copy this part and I'm going to save it in here for the port 3. So now we have the IP address, the allow access. We just need to give it an alias as well to make it unique. So I'm going to give it set alias and give it the name IT team. I have to put bracket because I have spaces. And now I should be able to see the correct config once I do the command show. So now I have the same thing as port 2. I have the IP address, I have the allow access, and I have an alias. So now we have all the network interfaces correctly set up. Now let's do an end and let's go back to the main screen. The second part I want to configure from the CLI to show you, which is the DHCP server. So this is how the computers connected to the IT team can get an IP address the same as the design team. So by going into config system DHCP server, we should have an existing one at least for port 2. So let's confirm this by doing the command show. So in this case, you see we have two different DHCP servers. Each one is uniquely named with a different number. So we have edit 1 and edit 2. And these two different DHCP servers represent different interfaces. So the first one we have here is the one corresponding to the FortiLink virtual interface. So this is something created by default. We actually don't need that at all. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this for now. And I'm just gonna do the show command again. We only have right now a single DHCP server that we actually need. This one is for port 2 or for the design team network. It's given the default gateway 10.10.10.1. This is the same IP address of port 2. This is the subnet mask /24. And this is the IP range or the IPs that clients can get from this DHCP server. 10.10.10.2 up to 10.10.10.254. So there are 252 possible computers can connect to port 2 and get an IP address from the Fortigate. But we don't have anything for port 3 or the IT team yet. So I want to create my own DHCP server from the CLI to show you how easy to do it. So by now, I want to make sure I'm inside DHCP server. I'm not inside a specific one. I'm just on the main menu, and I have to do edit and give it a unique number. So in this case, we deleted the first DHCP server that we did not need. I can also do different number, maybe edit 6, edit 7. It don't matter as long as it's unique, and it should show you new entry added. So once you see new entry, you're making sure that you are not overriding any existing data. So now let's get into the important stuff like default gateway. By default gateway, we mean the IP address of the interface. Port 3 had the IP address 10.10.20.1, so this will be our default gateway. The second option we need is the net mask. So by net mask, we mean the subnet size 255.255.255.0. This is the /24. And then we need to define the interface where this DHCP server will run and listen for DHCP discover and DHCP request. So we will choose, in this case, interface port 3. And the last thing we need to configure is the IP range. In the IP range, we define which IP addresses that we want to give to our clients. So by giving the IP range, you can also choose to give like exclusion or IP static assignment. As I mentioned in the GUI, you can also do under the config IP range or IP exclusion or static assignment. So I'm going to go config IP range. You can also create multiple ones in here in case you want to create discontinuity in the subnet and give specific static IP assignment in the middle of the subnet and have them excluded from the DHCP server. So for example, I'm going to create the one range in here and give it a start and end IP address. So in this case, I'm going to say set start IP 10.10.20. This is my subnet. And I'm not going to start from .2 this time. I'm going to start from .22. And the end IP for here is going to be 10.10.20.200. As you see in here, I did not choose the whole subnet as the one that was automatically generated, but I left some space in case I need to assign some static IPs for specific important devices or some other case. You can also create multiple IP range. So for example, if you have more than these clients or you exhausted these IP addresses, I'm going to click next and also create another IP range with the name 2. And I'm going to set start IP in here 10.10.20.220 and set end IP 10.10.20.254. And now by doing end, I'm back again to DHCP server number 6. Let's do a show and see what's inside this whole DHCP server. So inside here we have the default gateway, the interface IP of port 3 to be specific. It's assigned to port 3 itself, netmask /24. Inside the IP range, I have two different ones, unlike port 2. In here, I'm given IP addresses from 10.10.20.22 up until 200. There is a space in between, and then I'm given also IP from 220 up until 254. And now it's time to start testing this access. I'm gonna go back to my VMware workstation. I'm gonna show you how you can actually have a virtual machine go through the Fortigate to access the internet or to access anything, pretty much the same way we set up with the Fortigate by changing the network interface type. So I have a Linux virtual machine in here, and I'm gonna edit this virtual machine and change it from the way I prefer to run it, which is bridge, connect directly to the network and get an IP address similar to my Windows 11 network from the same subnet. I have now to change it to the LAN segment. So this way I'm forcing this virtual machine to go through the firewall and not have direct access to the internet. So my first Kubuntu machine, I'm gonna give it the design team LAN segment, or I'm gonna connect it to the LAN segment for the design team. Similarly for Kubuntu 2, which is a cloned version of this virtual machine, I'm gonna connect this to the IT team. So by going into network adapter, I'm gonna change the type from bridge to LAN segment IT team. In this way, my two virtual machines should get two different IP addresses and connect to different network adapters on the Fortigate. Power up all these different machines in the same time, and let's see what kind of IP addresses and access they get through the firewall. So for the first Kubuntu virtual machine that connects to the design team network, I'm gonna open my terminal in here and I want to try to find out my IP address. So I'm going to run the command IP address And this should show me that I got the IP address 10.10.10.2/24, which proves the FortiGate was able to provide me the first DHCP IP for my first Linux virtual machine. Now for the second virtual machine that connects to the IT team, I want to run the same thing, open the terminal and find out my IP address. So in this case, I want to put IPA, and as you see, I have 10.10.20.22, and the range is different because that's how I defined it in the CLI using the start IP address in the IP range. So as you see right now, I have both clients connected to the FortiGate. We can also verify this from the GUI using the DHCP monitor. Jump back to the GUI and go back to the dashboard with all these comprehensive monitoring tools that I choose in the beginning setup. I'm going to go into DHCP monitor, and as you see in here, I have Ubuntu running design team and I have Ubuntu running in the board 3. These are their MAC addresses, and that's how they connect to the FortiGate. Now also from these virtual machine, I should be able to access the FortiGate using the corresponding management IP address. For example, on my first design team, I'm given the IP address 10.10.10.2. I should be able to access the FortiGate using 10.10.10.1 from inside the virtual machine. And as you see in here, I'm connected to the FortiGate from the LAN segment using the HTTP access given to the design office or the board 2 interface using the allow access statement. We can also try the same thing from the Ubuntu but using SSH. So in this case, I connected to the 10.10.20.1 network. I can SSH to the firewall using that IP address. So I'm going to do SSH admin at 10.10.20.1. Once I agree to the certificate, enter my admin password, I'm also able to get to the FortiGate using SSH from the LAN segment for IT team. And that's how you are able to configure virtual machines to connect to this LAN segment. Now finally, to be able to access anything outside of the LAN segment, for example, for this virtual machine to access the internet, let's try to see if this actually would work. So I'm going to do ping, for example, put any IP address in the cloud like 8.8.8.8 Google DNS. As you see in here, my access is not working. So to have a better visibility into this, let's go into our FortiGate GUI. Let's go into the firewall policy, which actually shows us what is allowed and what is denied from the FortiGate perspective. So as you see in here, the FortiGate by default does not allow anything to go through. This is also known as the implicit deny policy, and is located at the end of the policy list. So as long as you don't have anything above that to allow any access, everything will be denied by default, and the logging for this policy is disabled. So to have visibility into the system, and we know already there is some block traffic because it has a 545 count, that means there is 545 packets or access requests that were disabled by the firewall so far from these two different Linux machines. So we need to enable the logging in this policy, and this is very important. So we're gonna go ahead and click log IPv4 violation traffic. So we have visibility into what is being disabled or what is being blocked, and we can able to fix issues in the near future. So now I'm gonna go back to the virtual machine and try the same command I ran earlier to ping 8.8.8.8. As you see, it's still not working. So I'm gonna stop it, and I see in here there are 6 packet requests. So the GUI should be able to tell me if this access was being blocked. And you do this by going into log and report and going to forward traffic. So any traffic that goes through the firewall and has log enabled should be appearing in the forward traffic, unless it's something concerning the network interface itself, which we're gonna see later under local traffic. So as you see in here, 10.10.10.2 is my first design team virtual machine, and it's trying to get access to an IP address 10.200.100.140. You can also have better visibility into logging in here by editing the columns. I like to add a few important columns, mainly the destination boards, so I know which service is that. And I also like to see the source interface and destination interface. So I'm going to choose the destination interface and also look for the source interface. And this way it would show me everything I need to configure a firewall policy later. And then we're going to do some reordering. So I'm going to move the source interface before the source IP address, and also the destination interface before the destination IP address. And finally, we're going to move the destination port all the way after the destination. This way, we should be able to see the traffic coming from design team port, going to an IP address 10.200.100.141, which is sent to port 1 by default. This is the default gateway or the default route, and port 53 is DNS. So actually DNS requests are being blocked because there is no policy to allow them. But I'm interested to see the 8.8.8.8, which is right here. You see here there is no port number because this is ping. Double clicking this deny request, you can see that the service is ping coming from port 3 to port 1 and is being denied for policy violation. It also shows you what policy ID has allowed or denied a specific thing. So when you see policy ID 0, that means this is the implicit deny. It has no number, it's always 0. So anything that shows up as 0, it means it's implicit deny. You can also see by the action. So now we need to create the first firewall policy to allow this access and test it out. Now by putting all the virtual machine behind the FortiGate, no access will be working unless you have specifically explicitly allowed this in the firewall policy. So I'm going to give this policy the name ping. You can choose whatever name you want. We can also choose to disable this feature to have a specific name for every policy if you don't want that. But for now, I'm going to give it a name because it's required by default. Now I was trying to ping from port 3, which is my IT team, and I was trying to go into 8.8.8.8, which is something on the internet. Port 1, in this case, our bridge network is the internet equivalent, so anything going through the internet has to go through port 1. Now for the source IP address, here we define which IP address is allowed to go or allowed to come from port 3 to do this specific access. So everything in the firewall is created in an address database, and you have to create an object for everything that you use, whether it's an IP address, IP range, or fully qualified domain name, or anything of this sort. You can create a specific address object for this. So I'm going to create one for my IT team. I'm just going to call it IT team, and it's already set to subnet by default. So all I need to do is define the subnet. So my subnet for IT team was 10.10.20.0/24, and I'm going to click OK. Now it shows up in here in my address database. And for the destination, we have to choose which IP addresses is the destination in this case. I was trying to ping the IP address 8.8.8.8. So I'm also going to create an address object for this, 8.8.8.8. And because this is a single IP address, the way you define it as a subnet, you just put a /32 because this is a single host or a single IP, which can be represented using /32. So now I have 8.8.8.8. The last thing I need to do is to define the service. And the service in this case will be ping. So you can do this in two different ways. You can put ping specifically, or you can choose ICMP, which include ping and other ICMP related services. So if you want just ping, you can choose ping. Now for the other things, the action in this case is accept because we want to allow this access. So we're going to leave it as accept. We don't need to change anything in here. There is an option for NAT, which is important to keep enabled in this case, but we have a specific video on network address translation later in this course. But for now, we need to keep it enabled to allow the traffic to leave our computer and be able to come back to the same virtual machine. And we don't need to change anything or enable any security profiles yet. We're going to talk about all these features later. We just need to make sure we log all the session. And this way, our logs would show on the forward traffic the same as the denied traffic, and we would know if the traffic is getting allowed and so on. And then we're going to click OK. So as you see, first ping policy is created in here. I actually like to change it to sequence view, which shows me the same view as the log and report from interface to interface, source IP, destination IP, and service. So now if the firewall goes through the firewall policy, it evaluates them from top down. So if you have multiple policies, you go through from the first one and try to match it to a specific traffic that is coming to the firewall. And if it meets that traffic and it's accepted, it will let it go through. Otherwise, it will go for the second one. and so on up until it meets the implicit denial where everything is getting dropped. So now we should be able to ping from our IT team to the destination 8.8.8.8. Let's test it out by going through the Kubuntu 2 one more time, and let's try the ping. And as you see, the firewall is now allowing me to finally ping the 8.8.8. This is true for the IT department, but we did not add anything for the design team. So I'm gonna go to the design team and try to do the same thing by opening my terminal. I'm gonna try to ping 8.8.8.8. And as you see, it's still getting blocked at the firewall level. So one thing I want to show you is, instead of creating a policy for every port, we can actually modify the policy that we created earlier and allow multiple interfaces in the same policy, which is something not enabled by default. And the way we do this is we go into System, Feature Visibility. I showed you earlier that you can allow unnamed policy, which is a time saver if you don't want to give every policy a specific name. So I like to enable this every time, and I also like to enable the other option for multiple interface policy. So this way I can have port 2 and port 3 in the same ping policy. I don't need to create two different policy. Once this is enabled, I'm going to go back to my policy and object, firewall policy. And now if I go into my ping policy and edit it, I can add multiple interfaces in here. So in this case, I'm going to add the design team, and also port 1 is still the same. It's still the destination for the public internet, but I just need to make sure my source address is added in here as well, because now we're coming from design team, which is 10.10.10.0, and we only allowed the source earlier 10.10.20.0. So I want to come here to the source, create a new address object, because everything in here has to be an object, and I want to call this one design team. So by giving this the subnet 10.10.10.0/24, I should be able to add the design team into the policy and give it the same access level as the IT team. Both teams now can ping to 8.8.8.8 and click OK. So now we have our policy with the two interfaces and the two source addresses. We should be able to test the access from our design team computer. So let's go to the VMware Workstation again, Kubuntu, and let's try the same access. And now we are finally able to ping the IP address 8.8.8.8 from the design team LAN segment. So this was a quick overview on how to install the Fortigate VM in VMware Workstation and how to set up virtual machine to actually go through the firewall. Eventually, when you need to give this virtual machine full access to the internet, you would need to enable the other ports like DNS, HTTP, HTTPS, or sometimes you have to enable the access to the internet with all services or all ports so that everything would work. But we'll see more on that in the course and see different scenarios for how to configure and restrict the access on your local network. Thank you for watching.